Good evening, friends, family, invited guests, honored guests, neighbors, in laws, outlaws, come one, come all, to another exciting edition of Homesteading Outlaws. So, tonight we celebrate the summer solstice, and the summer solstice is the longest day of the year, and it doesn't have more hours or minutes in the day than any other day of the year. It just has more daylight. And as a result, it happens to be my least favorite day of the year. Why is it my least favorite day of the year, you ask? Wouldn't you actually like having lots of daylight? That's a good question, and as a matter of fact, I do. In fact, I love having lots and lots and lots of daylight. So much so that I honestly, I would stay on this daylight nighttime cycle year round if we could, to be quite honest. I love lots of daylight. I love to be outdoors. I love to be able to do things outdoors. But the problem, of course, is that as we tip beyond this point, we gradually get less and less daylight. And that's something I don't like. I honestly wish that we had more daylight, but we do not. This is it. This is literally as good as it gets. And I guess that to me is perhaps indicative of maybe where we're at in life, perhaps too. This is as good as it gets. And perhaps that's, that's something that you have to recognize and accept in life, that sometimes things get as good as it gets. And, maybe we're there at this point in our country right now, perhaps, that things are about as good as they're going to be at this point in time. And I talked last time a little bit about that, and I said that if we didn't begin to take drastic action pretty soon, that next year things were going to get even worse. And that very well may be a prescient reminder here, given the date in which we're recording this, being the summer solstice, that perhaps we're at that, bit of that tipping point too in our own society, where we maybe this is not as good as it's ever been, but this is, that we're still better off at this point than we're going to be 1, 2, 3, 6 months, 12 months from now. I hope not. I do hope things get better. To be honest, I think all of us do. Because, Lord knows I'm not prepared to ultimately see this nation go or continue in the direction it's going. Don't think any of us truly are, no matter how prepared we are. That's just the reality. So I guess it's a reminder for all of us that, the times are changing, the seasons are changing. Um, you know, right now we are faced with some critical decisions, I think, as a people and as a society. I did get to see where there was a brief point of good news today. The Supreme Court started to release some of their opinions, and I hope there'll be better news this week too. But at least one ruling today did come down the side of at least Christian schools, anyways, to give parents who are granted school vouchers the ability of using those vouchers at Christian schools. Or any religious school, but in this case, it was basically about Christian schools, and that was good news. Honestly, I was excited to see that. Of course, the dissenters were wringing their hands over the idea that somehow this was going to tear down and erode the wall of separation between church and state, which is of course a myth. Whenever Thomas Jefferson originally wrote those words, he was not at all talking about the areas in which it has moved towards being applied. And of course, if anyone happens to read the First Amendment, they would notice that there were some words that were originally included in the First Amendment, among which, of course, was the word Congress, and that is that Congress shall make no law respecting, or establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And the idea, of course, being that the First Amendment specifically applied to Congress. Now, I would argue that really our country was indeed founded upon the idea that that we do hold certain things to be truthful and self-evident, and the idea that people are created with certain inalienable rights, and among those are things like life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And I would indeed believe or include freedom of speech and freedom of religion or from religion to be among those. And just to clarify, whenever I'm saying that, I'm not saying that that tax money can't in any way be applied towards any church. That's not what the original intent was, or nor for that matter the original wording. But I digress. The original intent was not for it to be applied in such a broad manner that basically government funds could never be attached towards anything that happened to border on religion. It was essentially the idea that government could not establish, basically any specific religion, nor could it prohibit people from freely exercising that religion. And ultimately, John Roberts, who has a history of being a little bit less than dependable as a conservative, anyways, in the past, at least he did on this occasion express some of his views and the idea that essentially by prohibiting these funds from being used towards being able to attend a school that happens to be associated with being a Christian school, that they were of course running afoul of the prohibition on prohibiting the free exercise thereof, essentially in the First Amendment. And that's a pretty good argument. I think the greater point is that ultimately, the original intent was not for government to essentially say, you know what, we can't have any dollars going in any direction here as it relates towards faith-based programs, be it schools or other things for that matter. It was never within the original framers' intent. In fact, if you actually study some of the events that were going on at the time of the nation's founding, you would see that probably a good chunk of those events would actually be prohibited today if we were to apply such a strict, I should say actually not really strict, but a liberal interpretation, of the prohibition clause in the First Amendment. So I do think that that was a bit of good news in that regard. I'm hoping that we'll see some better news in the days ahead. We'll see. There's more opinions to be released Thursday, as I understand. And it's possible they could have additional opinion days too coming up next week. So just because the calendar happens to not include them at this point, I don't think that it's prohibitory that they're bound to the point that they can't add additional opinion days and actually postpone some opinions. In fact, I really wouldn't be surprised if they didn't actually hold off on some opinions, perhaps even into next week. That way, it happens to give them a bit of a break after releasing those opinions with the 4th of July holiday coming on the heels of it the following week. It would make sense in some regards. They may end up postponing some of these late in the session or late in the month hearings, or I should say rulings, anyways, to give people some time to cool off a little bit, whatever the case may be. I mean, I'm optimistic in some regards, but I'm also, like I said, the pessimist in me sometimes tends to not let things go too easily, and so I can't help feeling that maybe those of us who are looking for some specific rulings may end up not seeing those, truthfully, regardless of what we've been led to believe so far. But we'll see. We'll see. I would love to see what happens, but time will tell. So here we are. Light is fading fast, and so am I, for that matter. It's been a long day and a long week. We have a busy week ahead of us here on the Outlaw Ranch. This week we are in the process of moving the rest of our things, so we are actually going back to our original home state in order to retrieve some of our belongings. And how does that fit into prepping for us? Well, for the last year and some change, we've been renting storage buildings, here and afar. to be able to hold some of the stuff that we have had to hold in storage while we were getting things ready here. And we have made significant strides towards being able to get away from having these storage buildings, but we've got to move our belongings from where they're at now out to here. Part of that is because, right now things are getting pretty expensive, and that includes storage buildings. So bear that in mind whenever you are considering your preps, whenever you're considering homesteading, if you're looking at transitioning from perhaps more of a suburban lifestyle to a little bit more of a rural lifestyle, downsizing. You may want to consider starting that process now as opposed to later. Don't wait until you are ready to move to do that. I mean, seriously, do not wait until that point, because I can assure you that you will definitely, you'll definitely be unprepared. Honestly, you really will. This is something that you need to take serious if you're going to make that transition from suburban to rural, or urban to suburban, or urban to rural. You need to consider what you have and what do you need, and how much can you sacrifice, how much can you do without, because part of homesteading is about figuring out where your priorities are. There's nothing wrong with wanting to hold on to certain attachments to, to what you, certain conveniences that you become attached to, or that you really really like. There's nothing wrong with wanting to hold on to some of those things. I think that sometimes a lot of people, whenever they hear homesteading, they automatically picture some guy in an outhouse, with maybe living in an old shack in the woods, and that's not exactly reality. It can be. Don't get me wrong. It can be. Homesteading means a lot of things, to a lot of people, a lot of different things to a lot of people, and there really is no single definition, I think, that you could apply which would make everyone happy. I do think that there are certain rules, if you will, that do apply to homesteading. Certain things that certainly you are trying to achieve, trying to attain. I think having a little bit simpler life is among those. Being a little bit more self-sufficient, or a lot self-sufficient, is among those. Being able to take care of feeding your family by producing things as much as you possibly can on the resources that you're provided with. Those are certain elements and certain truths, I think, that are definitely there for homesteading. But beyond that, there is a lot of gray area too. Is it an on-grid homestead? Is it an off-grid homestead? And by on-grid, exactly what do you mean? Do you mean no grid-tied power, no grid-tied water, no grid-tied sewer, no trash pickup or other things? Or, are you talking about kind of a hybrid approach where maybe you are going to want to, do some of these things and have some of these conveniences, but then perhaps figure out other solutions for other ones. So, example, maybe you will have grid-tied electric, but you're going to have a well. Okay, great. Maybe you're going to have, you know, rural water, but you're going to have solar. Maybe you're going to have solar and a well and a septic system, but you're going to have regular trash pickup from maybe from a trash service. So there are lots of things that can meet the definition depending on what you want to accomplish and what you want to do. I would say that the goal of homesteading is to try to be as self-sufficient as possible, but how far you take it along that goal is entirely up to you. It's your journey. Don't be afraid of that journey. Enjoy that journey. The last year and a half, we have ran full speed ahead trying to get things done, clearing land, dropping trees, cutting trees up, for future, building a structure, getting power, getting water, getting septic, getting trash pickup established. In our case, we wanted to have some of these things. Now we do plan, or we are in the process of creating backups for these things, these services, because we recognize that these backups are going to be very important in the days, weeks, months, and perhaps years ahead. But we also recognize that for us, it's important to have some of these things too. Internet is another example. What kind of internet do you plan on having? There are options now that didn't exist whenever we first began this journey a year and a half ago. When we first started out, it was our internet was our cell phone, and that was it. You know, we had limited access, but we did have some. We did have some access. When we first started out, we had we basically we were off grid completely. We had power through a generator, and I would not at all want to be in the same place a year, or I should say now that I was at a year ago in terms of power generation. We were using a generator at night to run fans and be able to have some light and things. We went from that to batteries, which we could store up, power and have it available to us at night to run certain things, to having to run air conditioners because the temperature, crested over 100 degrees, and some of the family got sick, not related to the heat, just in general, and they were running fevers, and we needed air conditioning to be able to take care of that. So we've learned some pretty valuable lessons, and we want to share these with everyone in the weeks ahead. We're in the process now of trying to complete our editing to make it so that we'll be able to share these videos with everyone in a way that is able to tell the story how it needs to be told. Um, and that takes a lot of work. So my ask, of course, is that everyone please be patient as we move through this transition and start to offer some of these learnings out to the homesteading community. I believe that there will be some value. I'm not saying there's anything revelatory that you couldn't get from any other source, just that perhaps the way in which we narrate it, the way in which we present it might be either entertaining or informative or both. And my hope is that it's both, truthfully, because I do believe that there's some of these things that are a little humorous that have happened to us, and we're perfectly willing to laugh at ourselves. And I think that you have to be willing to do that if you're going to be on YouTube, to be quite honest. You can't take yourself too seriously, because I can assure you other people will not share that seriousness that you might hold, and that's perfectly fine. We're willing to do that. Hopefully, to be able to at least give some level of value out to the community itself. So with that, I wish you all well. The sun is now departed, and we have an early morning for us to get ready for our flight. We will record a video once we get to our destination to update everyone on our progress and start to show our final trip from North Carolina back to where we are currently living. So I wish y'all well. Have a good evening, and thanks again, and stay safe. Homesteading Outlaws signing out.